A man asked to change his seat 3 times. And when he finally spoke the truth, no one saw it coming. Before we jump in, tell me where you're watching from and leave a comment below. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Let's begin. The bustling terminal at JFK Airport buzzed with the familiar chaos of travelers rushing to make their flights. But none of that chaos touched the calm, almost too deliberate movements of the man who boarded Flight 308 to Los Angeles. Clad in a dark navy jacket and worn jeans, he carried a battered leather bag that looked far older than him, its edges frayed as if it had traveled 1,000 miles and held countless secrets. As he stepped down the narrow aisle, the man's eyes flickered nervously from side to side, an unusual restlessness that immediately caught the attention of a few passengers nearby. He had bought his ticket weeks ago, but now as he scanned the rows of seats, he did something unexpected. He asked to change his assigned seat. The flight attendant, polite but slightly confused, complied and moved him from the window seat he had reserved to an aisle seat halfway down the plane. But the man's unease didn't dissipate. Instead, it grew. Barely 10 minutes into boarding, just as other passengers settled in, he stood again, quietly asking for another seat change. This time, he shifted to a middle seat near the back, clutching his bag tighter as if it were the only lifeline holding him together. Whispers began to stir around him. Why was this man so desperate to keep moving? What was he hiding? The air around him thickened with curiosity and a subtle tension, an invisible thread pulling the attention of those within earshot. As the plane finally filled, the man's eyes darted toward the emergency exit door at the very back of the cabin, and once again, he rose, asking to be moved, this time to the seat directly beside the emergency exit. The flight attendant's brows furrowed slightly in concern, but she nodded and made the change. Now, seated with one hand gripping the armrest and the other clutching the worn bag, he seemed both determined and terrified, his breathing shallow and quick as if he were preparing for a storm no one else could see. The other passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some glanced at the man, others at the flight crew, wondering if this was a threat or just the restless energy of a nervous traveler. Among them, a woman in her mid-30s, watching from the seat directly opposite him, felt a strange pull of empathy mixed with intrigue. The man wasn't just anxious. There was a story buried deep behind those tense eyes, a secret too heavy to carry alone on this flight thousands of feet above the earth. As the plane's engines roared to life and the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, the man's hands trembled ever so slightly, the faintest sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. He glanced around furtively, as though expecting someone to appear or something to happen at any moment. The narrator's heart quickened in sync, curiosity blooming into something more urgent. Who was this man? What had pushed him to this desperate behavior of changing seats 3 times, only to settle by the emergency exit, where danger and escape hung in delicate balance? The flight had just begun, but already the ordinary hum of a routine trip was overshadowed by the quiet suspense of a man on the edge, carrying a burden invisible to all but the keenest eyes. And as the plane soared higher into the cloud-covered sky, the narrator knew this was no ordinary passenger, and that soon, the truth he had been hiding would begin to unfold in ways no one could have anticipated. After settling into the middle seat near the back, the man barely had a moment to catch his breath before he stood again. His movements were quiet but urgent, catching the attention of the flight attendant and several passengers nearby. The cabin was steadily filling with the hum of conversations and the shuffling of luggage overhead, but his nervousness cut through the noise like a sharp whisper. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, his voice low but firm. "Could I please switch seats again? If possible, by the window this time." The attendant blinked, a little puzzled by his repeated requests, but, professional as always, nodded and gestured toward the empty window seat 2 rows ahead. The man moved quickly, as if the shift would grant him some small measure of safety, and sat down beside the porthole. From here, he stared out into the thick gray sky beyond the airport tarmac, though his eyes didn't really see anything outside. Instead, they flickered restlessly around the cabin, scanning faces and movements as though calculating risks, as if he was guarding himself against an invisible threat. Passengers nearby noticed his anxious glances, whispers rising in hushed tones. "Why so many seat changes?" one woman muttered to her husband. "Something's off with that guy," a man in a business suit commented under his breath. The flight attendant, meanwhile, maintained a polite distance, but her eyes kept drifting to him, noting the way he tapped his fingers nervously against the window frame. The man's hand slid slowly down to the worn leather bag resting on his lap. His fingers traced the outline of a subtle bulge inside, almost reverently, before clutching the strap tighter. The bag seemed like more than just luggage. It was a silent companion, heavy with unspoken stories. The narrator, seated diagonally across, found it impossible to look away. Something about the man's restless energy didn't feel like mere nervousness or travel jitters. It was something deeper, a tension that suggested he was carrying a weight much heavier than the bag on his lap. The murmurs around the cabin swelled as other passengers took notice of his unusual behavior, but nobody dared confront him or ask outright what was going on. Instead, the atmosphere thickened with silent speculation, curiosity warping into unease. The man's breathing grew shallow and faster, the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead reflecting the dim cabin lights. His eyes fixed on the emergency exit row, just a few seats ahead, his original destination, now out of reach. His seat changes seemed like desperate maneuvers to avoid something or someone. The plane's engines began their low roar, signaling that boarding was nearly complete. The man's shoulders tightened as if bracing himself for an imminent storm. The narrator wondered if this man was fleeing from a memory, a danger, or even himself. With every shift of his gaze and every tightening grip on the bag, the suspense thickened, filling the space between the rows of seats with an almost tangible tension. And while the flight attendants went about their duties and passengers settled in for the journey ahead, the man remained on edge, his silent story begging to be heard, to be understood, though no one yet dared to ask. The plane was no longer just a vessel for travel. It was a cage for secrets, for fears, and for truths about to be revealed. This second seat change was not a mere inconvenience. It was the first clear sign of a man caught in a web far more complicated than a simple flight. And as the engines hummed louder, the narrator's curiosity shifted into a quiet determination to find out what this man was running from and why he needed to change seats 3 times before admitting the truth. Barely had the man settled into the window seat than he rose again, his movements subtle yet deliberate, causing a ripple of quiet unease among the passengers around him. His face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously toward the emergency exit door at the rear of the cabin. The flight attendant, now clearly attentive to his behavior, approached with a polite but concerned smile. "Sir, is everything all right? Do you need assistance?" she asked gently. He nodded almost imperceptibly and leaned in slightly, whispering, "May I change seats again? Near the emergency exit, please." A collective hush seemed to fall over the nearby rows as the request was processed. The flight attendant exchanged a glance with the lead steward and, after a brief pause, agreed. The man moved quickly to the new seat, his hand never letting go of the strap of his bag. Settling by the emergency exit, he seemed to relax, just a fraction, but still carried a tension that pulled at the atmosphere around him. From this vantage point, he was close to what felt like a threshold, the door that could mean safety or escape if the worst happened. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some casting wary looks his way. One young woman whispered to her companion, "Why would someone want to sit by the emergency exit so desperately? Seems suspicious." Others nodded, eyes lingering on the man as if trying to decode a silent message in his restless hands or the way his gaze flickered constantly. The narrator watched closely, feeling a blend of intrigue and empathy. There was something deeply human behind the man's nervous energy, a story of fear, of running, or maybe of desperate hope. The hum of the plane's engines grew louder as the final boarding announcements echoed through the cabin. Outside, the skies were overcast, casting a grayish-blue tint through the windows. The man's breathing was uneven, his fingers tightening into a pale grip on the leather bag that looked almost worn to threads from years of use. He glanced at the flight crew with a mix of gratitude and worry, as if aware that their eyes were now on him, silently waiting to see what would come next. The cabin settled into a strange quiet, the usual chatter subdued by the weight of the man's presence. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks, unsure if they should intervene or stay silent. Meanwhile, the man whispered softly to himself, as if rehearsing words or steeling himself for a truth he couldn't yet voice aloud. The narrator, seated just a few rows away, leaned forward slightly, heart pounding with anticipation. What was this secret so heavy that it pushed a man to change seats 3 times mid-flight, each move carrying more urgency than the last? As the plane prepared to taxi and take off, the man's gaze settled on the emergency exit, the symbol of potential freedom or danger, and the narrator sensed that the story was about to break open. Behind the worn leather of his bag, behind the nervous requests and shifting seats, lay a truth waiting to be admitted, a truth that would turn a routine flight into an unforgettable journey. And as the wheels lifted off the runway, soaring into the clouds, the silent tension in the cabin hinted that the man's restless journey was only just beginning. The man's third and final seat change had been granted, and now seated beside the emergency exit, a strange stillness seemed to descend over him. He gripped the armrest tightly, his knuckles white, and clutched the worn leather bag on his lap like a lifeline. The tension around him was palpable. Passengers nearby shifted uneasily in their seats, exchanging worried glances that betrayed a growing sense of suspicion. Some whispered softly, their voices filled with unease. Why would someone want to sit so close to the emergency exit? Is he trying to cause trouble? The flight attendant, professional but clearly attentive, kept a discreet watch on the man, ready to step in if needed. Meanwhile, the narrator, seated just a few rows away, observed him closely. There was something about the man's restless energy, the way his eyes flicked nervously between the aisle and the emergency door, that suggested he was guarding something far more than just his bag. The plane was now fully boarded, the engines humming steadily as the captain's voice announced the imminent departure. Outside, gray clouds gathered, casting a muted light through the windows, and inside the cabin, a silent tension grew heavier by the second. The man's breathing became shallow and uneven, his body tense, as if preparing for an invisible storm. Suddenly, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a near whisper, and glanced toward the narrator. "I need to tell you something," he said urgently, his voice trembling. The narrator's heart skipped a beat. After the 3 seat changes, the nervous glances, and the palpable fear, the moment of truth had arrived. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly, his eyes searching for some sign of understanding or compassion. "I'm running from something, someone dangerous. And this bag, it holds proof that could change everything." The confession hung in the air, thick and heavy, shocking in its suddenness but strangely compelling. The narrator nodded slowly, signaling they were listening, ready to hear more. Around them, the passengers remained unaware, immersed in their own worlds, while this private story unfolded in the midst of the flight's mechanical routine. The man's hands trembled as he gently opened the leather bag, revealing a glimpse of worn folders and documents. Evidence, he said, that could bring down a criminal organization. His eyes flickered with a mix of fear and hope, a man caught between past mistakes and a slim chance of redemption. The narrator felt a surge of empathy, realizing the man was not a threat, but a victim of circumstances beyond his control. This moment, on a flight thousands of feet above the ground, was no longer just a journey from one city to another. It was the beginning of a desperate fight for safety, justice, and survival. As the plane climbed steadily into the cloudy sky, the man's story unfolded quietly but urgently, weaving a tale of danger, courage, and a fragile hope that truth might still prevail. The narrator, now deeply invested, knew this flight would change everything for both of them. And somewhere deep inside, They both understood that the man's final admission was not an end, but a new beginning, a chance to face the past and reclaim the future. The plane had been in the air for just under 20 minutes, cruising steadily above a thick blanket of clouds, when the man finally spoke again. His voice was low, barely more than a breath above a whisper, but there was a shift in his tone, less frantic now, more resolved, like someone who had accepted what must be done. "I didn't come on this flight by accident," he said, his gaze fixed out the window, though his eyes weren't focused on anything beyond the glass. "I had to get out. I had to get this to someone, anyone, before they found me again." The narrator leaned in slightly, their curiosity now fully entwined with concern. "Who's after you?" they asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened his bag just wide enough for the narrator to catch a glimpse. Inside were several envelopes, thick stacks of printed reports, and a small flash drive taped inside a paperback novel's hollowed-out pages. The contents looked official: bank ledgers, internal memos, and even surveillance photographs, documents stamped with a company logo the narrator vaguely recognized. 3 weeks ago, the man said, his voice hollow, "I found out my boss wasn't just laundering money. He was helping smuggle weapons through private freight deals, using the company's name to cover it all. I was in logistics. I saw the shipping reports, and something didn't add up. I thought maybe it was just a clerical error at first, but it wasn't." He rubbed his face with both hands, the weight of sleepless nights clinging to every gesture. "I confronted a colleague, someone I trusted, and the next day, I came home to find my apartment had been ransacked. My phone was bugged. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. There's too much power behind this. They have people everywhere. I had to disappear, at least until I could get this into the right hands." The narrator's eyes widened. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Everything about the man's anxious behavior now made sense. The changing seats, the constant scanning of faces, the desperation to be near an exit. He wasn't looking to harm anyone. He was looking for a way out if things went wrong. "Why this flight?" the narrator asked. "Why now?" The man looked over, his expression sharper now. "Because one of the people I need to reach is supposed to be in LA, a journalist who's done pieces on corporate corruption. I reached out anonymously. She told me if I could get there safely, she'd meet me. I think they're onto me. I've seen the same guy 3 times this week. Outside my motel, then in the airport this morning. He didn't board, but I don't think that means I'm in the clear." His hand went to the bag again, protective and steady. This evidence could ruin them. "I just have to make it to LA. A beat passed between them, and the narrator felt a sudden shift, not just in the man's story, but in their own sense of responsibility. They weren't just a bystander now. They were a witness to something dangerous and real. "Okay," the narrator said quietly. "You're not alone in this. Whatever's in that bag, it's worth protecting." The man blinked, visibly moved, and gave the slightest nod. Outside the window, the sky stretched in soft gradients of gray and white, a quiet canvas beneath the storm brewing inside the cabin. Somewhere behind them, a passenger rose to use the restroom, and the man tensed instinctively, his eyes flicking to the movement like a hunted animal trained to spot danger. The narrator saw it, too, the sense that this wasn't over, that whatever he was running from might still find its way on board. But for now, in this fragile sanctuary above the clouds, 2 strangers shared the beginning of an alliance forged not by chance, but by necessity. The hum of the engines provided a constant backdrop, a low, droning soundtrack to a truth too big to ignore. The man had said more in the past 10 minutes than most people confessed in a lifetime, and now, as he leaned back against the seat by the emergency exit, there was a flicker of something close to calm in his face, an uneasy peace, perhaps, after unburdening himself. But that peace was short-lived. A sudden, subtle shift in the cabin's energy disrupted it. From the corner of his eye, the man caught sight of a passenger 3 rows ahead. Middle seat, aisle side, black windbreaker zipped up to the chin, and sunglasses still on despite being inside a dimly lit aircraft. The man froze. He leaned toward the narrator, his voice barely audible. "That's him," he whispered, breath tight. "He was at the airport this morning. I saw him near security, just standing, not boarding. I was sure he didn't get on." The The narrator followed his gaze discreetly. The man in the windbreaker didn't appear outwardly suspicious. No one else seemed to be watching him. But there was something off. He hadn't moved in nearly 10 minutes. No drink, no phone, no magazine. Just stillness. Too much of it. What do you want to do? The narrator asked. If he's following you, the man's grip on the leather bag tightened again, his knuckles whitening. If he's here, they know. They know I'm on this flight. His eyes darted to the emergency exit beside him. The narrator could see the thoughts spiraling behind those tired, frantic eyes. How close the door was, how high they were, how little time remained. I'm not going to do anything reckless, the man said quickly, sensing the concern forming on the narrator's face. I'm not trying to escape Midair. I need to be ready. We can't be sure he's after you, the narrator offered, but it sounded hollow even as they said it. The way the supposed pursuer sat, unmoving, occasionally tilting his head just slightly in their direction. It wasn't the look of someone flying home to visit family. It was calculated presence. You said you were meeting a journalist in L.A., the narrator continued. Do you have her contact information? Someone we could call the second we land. The man nodded and patted the bag. There's a burner phone inside. She gave me a number. Said to call her from the airport, Terminal 2, arrivals level. He paused, then added, she's the only person I trust right now. The narrator glanced around the cabin, suddenly hyper-aware of everyone. The elderly couple across the aisle, the teenager with noise-canceling headphones, the young mother bouncing her fussy baby. None of them seemed to notice the quiet storm brewing between row 19 and row 22. But the man in the black windbreaker did. He tilted his head again. This time, the movement was too direct to ignore. He was watching. No, tracking. A slow, calculating stare now locked in, like a wolf studying prey. The narrator leaned in again. Listen to me. If this gets weird, if he tries anything, don't panic. Don't run. We'll stay calm. We'll talk to the flight attendants, get security involved the moment we land. You're not alone in this. The man swallowed hard, nodding. For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed his face, faint but real. The idea that someone believed him, that someone would stand with him, even if only for the next hour, that meant something. Outside the window, the clouds began to break, revealing patches of sunlight over the vast western desert. The plane's course tilted slightly as it began its descent. There wasn't much time left. 1 hour, maybe less. The man took a deep breath and shifted in his seat. The bag was still on his lap, anchored like a heartbeat. The truth was inside it. The danger was 3 rows ahead, and the clock was ticking. The plane continued its smooth descent, but inside the cabin, tension tightened like a wire strung too taut. The narrator could feel it not just in the man beside them, whose fingers twitched against the fraying handle of his bag, but in their own chest, a heaviness that made every breath feel slightly shallower than the last. The man in the black windbreaker was still watching. Not constantly, not obviously, but consistently enough to keep the narrator on edge. Every now and then, his head would turn slightly toward them, just enough for the dark lenses of his sunglasses to reflect the narrow aisle, before shifting back to neutral like nothing had ever happened. It was an almost perfect act of nonchalance. Almost. What's your plan when we land? The narrator whispered, careful not to draw attention. Get off as fast as I can. Don't go to baggage claim. Head straight for the lower arrivals level and call the reporter, the man replied. If I stay moving, if I keep the crowd between me and anyone following, he trailed off. The logic made sense in theory, but it was the tremble in his voice that gave him away. He wasn't sure he'd make it off the plane without someone trying to stop him. If they're here, he added, they won't let me walk off that jet bridge. The narrator studied the cabin. 2 flight attendants were at the front near the galley. Another stood near the lavatory, checking on a passenger who'd asked for water. No one seemed aware of the slow brewing storm. To everyone else, it was a routine flight, Los Angeles bound, just another Wednesday morning in the skies. The narrator leaned closer. What's your name? Ryan, the man said. Ryan Marks. All right, Ryan. If anything happens, if someone tries to stop you before we're off the plane, don't say anything. I'll talk. I'll say you're with me. Ryan looked at them, startled. You do that? You're trying to do the right thing. That makes you the good guy. That matters, the narrator said, meaning every word. Ryan nodded slowly, the moment sinking in. He wasn't alone. Someone was finally willing to stand between him and whatever waited beyond the plane door. The cabin lights flickered, then glowed a soft amber as the captain's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our initial descent into Los Angeles shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. A rustle of motion passed through the cabin. Passengers shifting upright, tray tables clicking into place. In row 22, the man in the windbreaker also sat forward. He adjusted his sunglasses with one hand and slowly reached beneath the seat in front of him. The narrator stiffened, heart pounding. He's moving, they whispered. Ryan straightened in his seat, eyes alert. But the man didn't pull out a weapon. He retrieved a plain black backpack and set it in his lap. Still, the gesture felt calculated, as if he was waiting for something or someone. I can't wait until we land, Ryan muttered. If he's planning something, you'll wait, the narrator said firmly. We don't cause panic. If we stand up now, we'll spook him and everyone else. The flight crew won't hesitate to restrain the wrong person if they think there's a threat. You need to hold steady. Ryan looked away, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed to lock. But he didn't argue. The narrator took a slow breath and glanced toward the man in the windbreaker again. He was now rifling through the front pocket of his bag. A pen, a folded napkin. Nothing that screamed danger, but everything about him screamed intent. And still, no one else saw it. That made it worse. Ryan shifted slightly, then reached into his coat pocket. Slowly, carefully, he retrieved a small, sealed envelope. If I don't make it off this plane, he whispered, sliding it into the narrator's hand, give this to her. Please. The narrator took it without hesitation. The envelope was thin but dense, heavy in the way a secret feels when it's finally spoken. As the plane began to tilt into descent, wheels lowering, flaps extending, and the California sun breaking through the clouds, both of them knew the landing was only the beginning. The cabin buzzed with the low murmur of passengers preparing for landing. Seatbacks upright, tray tables stowed, window shades up. Yet amid the familiar rituals, the tension between rows 19 and 22 thickened like storm clouds. Ryan gripped the armrest with one hand, the other resting lightly on the flap of his leather bag. The narrator kept the sealed envelope tucked discreetly between their leg and the seat, a physical promise they didn't dare let go. The plane began its slow glide downward. The skyline of Los Angeles appeared faintly through the windows, a hazy stretch of buildings framed by distant mountains. But inside, time moved differently, stretched thin by nerves and uncertainty. 3 rows ahead, the man in the windbreaker remained unervingly calm. He hadn't removed his sunglasses once. He hadn't spoken to anyone. His posture was rigid now, backpack held tightly against his chest. Whatever he was waiting for, it was coming. We're 30 minutes out, Ryan whispered. Once we're on the ground, I need to move fast. But if he follows me, it'll blow everything. I can't risk leading him to her. Then don't, the narrator replied. We'll split. I'll draw his attention. You go the opposite direction. Use the crowd. Ryan hesitated, visibly torn. You don't have to do that. I do, the narrator said. You asked for help. That means someone has to stand up for you when it counts. I'm not letting you walk off this flight alone into whatever trap they've set. The man exhaled, chest rising and falling like he hadn't taken a full breath in days. For a fleeting second, a glimmer of relief passed through his eyes. But then the seatbelt light pinged, and the captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now on final approach. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. The finality of the words hit hard. There would be no more time for planning. No second chances. Ryan sat back, straightening his jacket, adjusting the collar to cover the scar running along the side of his neck. The narrator noticed it now for the first time. Thin and pale, the kind left behind by something sharp, maybe intentional. A reminder that whatever he was fleeing from wasn't just theoretical. Tell me again where she's meeting you, the narrator said, rehearsing the escape in their mind. Terminal 2, Ryan replied. Arrivals level, near the rideshare pickup zone. She said she'd wait inside the Starbucks. Black coat. Blonde. She'll be reading the LA Times. The narrator nodded, repeating it silently. The moment the doors opened, Ryan would need to vanish into that terminal like smoke. And the man in the windbreaker, he couldn't be allowed to follow. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical clunk. The plane tilted slightly as it aligned with the runway. Silence fell over the cabin, punctuated only by the quiet hiss of air vents and the nervous tapping of fingers on armrests. The narrator glanced one last time toward the man 3 rows ahead. He was upright, alert, fingers resting on his backpack zipper. As the wheels touched down with a screech and a jolt, the cabin erupted in the usual mix of relief and impatience. Passengers unbuckling early, phones powering back on, conversations resuming. But for Ryan and the narrator, the moment had arrived. "Stay close to me until we reach the jet bridge," the narrator said. "Then split left. I'll go right. If he follows me, you run." "Thank you," Ryan whispered. "Whatever happens, thank you." The plane taxied slowly toward the gate, every rotation of the wheels dragging the moment out. Outside, the terminal loomed, glass and steel bathed in California sunlight. The narrator tucked the envelope deeper into their coat pocket and flexed their fingers. One step at a time. This wasn't just a landing. It was an escape in motion. The jet bridge connected with a metallic thunk. Overhead bins creaked open. Passengers stood. But in row 19 and row 22, the real flight had just begun. The plane door opened with a mechanical hiss, and warm Los Angeles air spilled into the cabin. Passengers surged to their feet in a tide of impatience, reaching for overhead bins, stretching stiff limbs, tapping at phones freshly reconnected to the world. But in row 19, Ryan sat frozen. His hand gripped the handle of his leather bag so tightly that his knuckles had gone white, and his eyes flicked toward the narrow aisle like it was a trap instead of an exit. The narrator stood beside him, deliberately slow, deliberately calm. Every movement was measured. Every glance counted. From 3 rows ahead, the man in the black windbreaker stood as well, slipping his backpack over one shoulder. His head turned slightly, scanning the flow of people, but his eyes, still hidden behind those dark sunglasses, landed squarely on Ryan for just a second too long. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. He knew. "Stay with me," the narrator murmured, stepping into the aisle. "We'll move together until the bridge. Once we're out of sight, we split." Ryan nodded tightly, rising to follow. They merged into the crowd, inching toward the front, hemmed in by bodies and bags, the clamor of voices mixing with the metallic clicks of latches and zippers. As they passed the last row, the narrator risked a glance back. The man in the windbreaker had paused, letting a row of passengers exit before him. But he was moving now, slow, controlled, and far too close. The narrator adjusted their posture, turning slightly to block his view of Ryan. "Just a few more steps," they said under their breath. The flight attendant by the cockpit smiled and offered the usual farewell, but her voice sounded distant, as if muffled by water. The narrator's heart pounded. The jet bridge loomed ahead, cool and gray and narrow. Once they crossed into it, they'd be outside the sealed safety of the plane. That's when everything would change. As soon as they stepped into the jet bridge, Ryan dropped into a fast walk, slipping into the moving crowd like a thread pulled through fabric. The narrator slowed. Just enough. Just long enough to hesitate at the edge, one hand pretending to search a coat pocket. The man in the windbreaker followed. Not quickly, but with intent. His eyes moved between Ryan's disappearing figure and the narrator, as if calculating something. Then he made his move. He stepped forward, brushing too close, the sleeve of his jacket grazing the narrator's arm. "You shouldn't have helped him," he muttered, voice low and cold. The narrator turned slowly, heart racing. "Excuse me. You have no idea what you're interfering with," he said. His tone was level, but filled with warning. "You just made yourself a problem. If you're not law enforcement, you have no right to follow or threaten him," the narrator replied. "And if you are, you'd better produce a badge and a warrant." His lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You think this is about the law?" he asked. "You think you're on the right side?" I think anyone willing to threaten a stranger in an airport should be the one answering questions, the narrator shot back. Maybe you should stick around and talk to TSA. That got his attention. His jaw tightened. His hand clenched the strap of his backpack a little harder. You're making a mistake, he said, stepping back. Let it go. But it was already too late. The narrator reached for their phone, not to call, but to make it clear they could. The gesture alone sent a message. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not alone. And I'm not backing down. The man hesitated 1 second longer, then turned on his heel and disappeared into the jet bridge crowd. The narrator let out a breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. Behind them, another group of passengers moved forward, eager to disembark. But ahead, through the glass walls of the terminal, Ryan was already gone, vanished into the sea of travelers and blinking arrival boards. He had done it, at least for now. The narrator stepped out into the terminal, heart still thudding, fingers curled around the envelope in their pocket. The game had changed, and so had the stakes. The airport terminal buzzed with energy, people rushing past with wheeled suitcases, children trailing behind distracted parents, and the constant hum of overhead announcements. But none of it registered with the narrator. Not yet. Their ears still rang with the man's final words. You're making a mistake. It echoed louder than the boarding calls and louder than the footsteps receding into the terminal. The narrator turned slowly, scanning the crowd, but there was no sign of him anymore. No windbreaker, no sunglasses, no shadow trailing behind. He'd melted into the airport, vanished like vapor. But Ryan had too, and that meant, for the moment, he was safe. The narrator stepped away from the gate, slipping the envelope deeper into their coat pocket. It was slim, sealed with a single piece of tape, the kind you'd find in any office drawer. But it weighed more than it should. Not physically, but emotionally. Whatever secrets it held, they weren't light. They moved down the concourse quickly, not toward baggage claim, but away from it, weaving through a flow of passengers and toward a quiet alcove near an airport bookstore. There, beneath the echo of televisions broadcasting muted news and the soft scent of overpriced coffee, they paused and pulled out their phone. One missed call. No voicemail. They dialed the number Ryan had scribbled on a napkin in shaky handwriting during the flight. Marissa. No last name. Just Marissa. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. Her voice was cautious, guarded. Hello. I was with Ryan on the plane. He's okay. He got out. Silence. Then a rush of breath. Where is he? He didn't tell me where he was going after. He said Starbucks at Terminal 2, arrivals level. He planned to find you there. I'm not at Terminal 2 anymore, she said quickly. There were too many people. I felt like someone was watching me. I moved to the parking garage rooftop, level 5, northeast corner. I could see the runway from here. The narrator turned toward a window that looked out across the tarmac, squinting at the sunlight glinting off cars. He said someone was following him. A man in a windbreaker. Black sunglasses. He's here too. I know, she whispered. I saw him. He's not alone. That made the narrator go still. What do you mean? There's another one, she said, voice trembling now. He was in the coffee shop when I walked in, staring at the door. Didn't order anything. Just watched. I waited a few minutes, then slipped out. I didn't think they'd bring two. You think they were sent by the people Ryan used to work for? I don't think, she said. I know. And if they get to him before we do, it's over. The narrator glanced back toward the terminal entrance. People were still flooding out of Gate 32, oblivious to anything but their next connection or rideshare app. I have something he gave me, the narrator said. An envelope. He made me promise to get it to you, if anything happened. A pause. You still have it? Of course. Then meet me, she said firmly. Now, he'll find me if he can, but if not, we need to make sure someone knows what's inside that envelope. Where? Top level of parking garage B, northeast corner. There's a red bench facing the airfield. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'm on my way. The call ended. The narrator shoved the phone back in their pocket, adrenaline spiking again. Their feet moved before their mind could catch up, cutting across the terminal, down the escalator, following blue signs toward ground transport and parking decks. As they passed the revolving doors and stepped out into the California sun, Heat radiated off the concrete, stinging their skin like static. But they welcomed it. It grounded them. 5 more minutes. Maybe less. Every second was a gamble now. The envelope bounced slightly in their coat, a steady reminder with each step. Whatever Ryan had discovered, it had cost him his job, his peace, and maybe even his freedom. But now it was in their hands, and they had a promise to keep. The stairs to parking garage B were exposed to the sun, each step echoing with a hollow clang of urgency. The narrator moved quickly, taking 2 steps at a time, heart pounding louder with every flight climbed. The envelope pressed against their ribs like a heartbeat, a pulsing reminder that they weren't just carrying paper, they were carrying someone's last chance. The 5th level opened up into bright, unfiltered sunlight and a sweeping view of the airport's runways. The roar of jet engines was louder up here, and the wind tugged at the narrator's coat as they emerged into the open air. The rooftop was mostly empty, just a few scattered cars baking in the sun and distant movement down by the stairwells. Then they saw her. Marissa. She was seated exactly where she said she'd be, on a weathered red bench in the northeast corner, her blonde hair tied back in a loose bun, her black coat draped over one shoulder. She looked younger than expected, maybe early 30s, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the lot like a hawk. When she spotted the narrator approaching, she stood immediately. "You came," she said. Her voice was softer now, filled with relief. "I didn't know if he'd make it, or if you would." "He made it," the narrator said, handing over the envelope. "He's out there somewhere. Said he'd find you, but he told me to give this to you in case they got to him," she finished, nodding grimly. She opened the envelope carefully, like it might explode. Inside were 3 neatly folded pages, a USB flash drive taped between them. Her eyes skimmed the first page, then widened. "This is it," she whispered. "These are the names, dates, transfers, off-book accounts, all of it." "What is it exactly?" the narrator asked. "What did he uncover?" Marissa looked up, her face shadowed by fear. "He used to work for a contractor that handled security clearances for federal employees. On the surface, it was all background checks and access approvals. But underneath," she held up the pages, "they were using the clearance process to quietly eliminate people, red flag them as risks so they'd lose jobs, get blacklisted. People who spoke up about corruption, waste, or worse." The narrator's stomach turned. "And a flash drive?" "Proof," she said. "Encrypted files. Internal memos. Ryan spent months collecting it. But when he tried to go through official channels, they turned on him. Said he'd fabricated it. That he was unstable. They tried to lock him up, discredit him. He ran. And the men at the airport? They're not government," she said. "Not directly. They're private agents, contracted muscle, legal deniability. They don't arrest people. They disappear them." The wind picked up again, blowing loose strands of her hair across her face. She looked at the envelope like it was both salvation and a curse. "I need to get this to someone safe," she said. "Real journalists. Ones who can't be bought. But first, we have to get out of here." "We?" the narrator asked. "You helped him," she said simply. "You're involved now. And if they saw us meet," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the stairwell behind them. Instinctively, the narrator turned. 2 men appeared, one in a dark gray jacket, the other in plain clothes, but both with the same calculated movement, the same sharp eyes scanning, locking onto their target. Marissa grabbed the narrator's arm. "Run." They took off between rows of cars, ducking low, dodging shadows. The envelope was tucked beneath Marissa's coat now, and the narrator kept close as they sprinted across the rooftop. Behind them, the men shouted, words lost in wind and distance, but their pursuit was unmistakable. They reached the far side of the garage, where a ramp spiraled down to the level below. Marissa didn't hesitate. She took the curve at full speed, her coat flaring behind her. The narrator followed, legs burning, lungs on fire. Down one level, then another. They couldn't outrun them forever. But if they could just reach the ground, reach the terminal, they might disappear into the crowd again. And this time, they'd be the ones who vanished. The spiral ramp felt endless. Concrete blurred beneath their feet as Marissa and the narrator descended, the echo of footsteps above growing louder with every breath. They didn't look back. There was no time, no use in confirming what they already knew. The men were closing in. Level 2. Marissa gasped, voice thin with exertion. Keep going. We cut across to the elevators on 1. The narrator didn't answer, just nodded and pushed harder. Their lungs screamed, muscles burning, but adrenaline drowned the pain. They had one job now, get her out. The envelope tucked under Marissa's coat was more than evidence. It was a lit fuse. If it fell into the wrong hands, everything Ryan had risked, everything he had run from, would be erased in an instant. By the time they reached level 1, the garage had grown darker. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming faintly. Marissa veered left, weaving through a maze of parked sedans and SUVs toward the elevator bank nestled in a concrete alcove. The narrator followed closely, footfalls muffled by the worn rubber flooring. There, she whispered, jabbing the elevator button. Nothing happened. No. Come on, come on. A ding echoed to their right. The other elevator. Doors slid open. Without hesitation, they bolted. The narrator hit the close button repeatedly, while Marissa stabbed at the lobby floor. The doors inched shut. Then, a flicker of motion, a dark figure turning the corner just as the gap sealed with a soft metallic click. Silence. They descended. For 5 seconds, no one said anything. Then Marissa collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. We bought a minute. Maybe 2. What now? The narrator asked. We can't go back to the terminal. No, she said, pulling out her phone. I'm calling someone I trust. His name's Marcus. He's ex-military, runs private security now. We worked together at the contractor's office before things went bad. He believed Ryan. She tapped the screen, waited. He's nearby, picking us up outside departures in 5 minutes. That's not much time. No, she agreed. But it's enough if we move. The elevator dinged and opened into the airport's south lobby. Glass doors led to the departures drop-off lane, where cars idled and yellow taxis rolled past. Tourists and travelers moved in every direction, some laughing, some arguing, all oblivious to the silent war unraveling in the shadows. Marissa scanned the crowd. Too exposed. We loop behind that newsstand, cut through the lobby, and exit on the far side. Marcus will swing around. They slipped into the flow of foot traffic, heads down, pace casual. The narrator's eyes darted over shoulders, around corners, into reflections in the windows. Any one of these people could be another agent. Anyone that might reach for a radio, a gun, or worse. Then, like clockwork, the man from the garage appeared. The one in the dark gray jacket. He was across the lobby, weaving past a group of college students dragging duffel bags. His head turned, and his gaze landed on them. He moved faster. He's back, the narrator muttered. 11 o'clock. Marissa didn't flinch. Keep walking. Turn at the kiosk. There's a door behind the vending machines. Employee access. We can lose him there. They turned smoothly, blending behind a group of flight attendants. The door was unmarked, half hidden behind an ancient Pepsi machine humming softly. Marissa pushed it open, and they disappeared into a narrow corridor lit by emergency bulbs. The sound of the airport fell away. Concrete walls closed in around them. This way, she said, leading them through a service hallway that smelled of cleaning fluid and old coffee. After several turns, they burst out through another door into sunlight. They were on the far edge of the departures drop-off zone, near a construction barricade. A dark gray SUV with tinted windows idled by the curb. The driver, a man in his 40s, muscular, clean-shaven, leaned out. Marissa, Marcus, she called. They ran. The back door flew open. They dove inside. Tires screeched as Marcus gunned the engine. The narrator twisted around in time to see the man in the gray jacket sprinting into view, slowing only as the SUV peeled away. He stood still, watching them vanish into traffic. He didn't chase. He just raised a phone to his ear and smiled. The SUV barreled down the airport expressway, weaving through lanes like a needle through thread. Marcus drove with the calm precision of someone who'd been trained to handle pressure, not just tolerate it, but weaponize it. His eyes flicked between mirrors and road signs, hands steady on the wheel. "We've got a tail," he said without looking back. Marissa jerked her head around. "How close?" "Too close," Marcus said. "Black Charger. Tinted windows. He's 3 car lengths back, and try not to look like it." The narrator twisted in their seat. Sure enough, there it was, sleek, dark, with a low hum like a predator stalking prey. "We have the files," Marissa said, holding the envelope in her lap like a sacred relic. "We just need to get somewhere safe. Somewhere we can transfer it." "I've got a safe house," Marcus said. "It's not far. In Glendale. Unlisted. Coded entry. No digital footprint. But we'll have to lose him before we get near it." "How?" the narrator asked. "We're on a straight stretch of freeway. He'll follow us to the door." "Not if we split," Marcus said. "There's a park and ride 2 exits ahead. I drop one of you there with the envelope, double back, and draw the tail off. The other takes a ride share from the lot. Cash only. You'll meet me at the safe house in 2 hours." Marissa hesitated. "We shouldn't split. We should if we want this to survive," Marcus said, tone clipped. "They'll follow the car. They'll follow me. But they won't expect a civilian to slip away on foot." "I'll go," the narrator said suddenly. "I have the smallest profile. They've seen me, but not enough to know what I'll do. I'll blend better than either of you." Marissa looked at them, searching their face. After a breath, she nodded and passed the envelope over. "You have to guard this like your life depends on it," she said. "Because it probably does." "I will." Marcus glanced at the mirror again. "We're almost there. Get ready." The SUV turned sharply onto the off-ramp, tires squealing. The park and ride appeared around a bend, a vast, mostly empty lot surrounded by tall hedges and a chain-link fence. Marcus pulled into a side entrance, circled behind a row of parked vans, and stopped. "Go. South End. There's a shuttle stop with a bench. Wait 3 minutes, then call a cab. Do not use your name." The narrator jumped out, envelope tucked under one arm, and sprinted across the lot. Marcus didn't wait. He peeled out the opposite side and vanished into the traffic. The narrator ducked behind a rusted city bus, heart hammering in their chest. They crouched low and watched the street. 2 minutes passed. Then a black Charger sped by the entrance. It didn't slow down, didn't turn in. It followed Marcus. The narrator exhaled. For now, they were alone, but not safe. They waited the full 3 minutes, then another 2, before standing and walking briskly to the bench. From their coat pocket, they pulled a prepaid phone Ryan had given them, just in case. No GPS, no names. They dialed the rideshare number Marissa had written on the envelope flap and gave only an intersection 2 blocks from the lot. The operator confirmed pickup in 5 minutes. The narrator sat on the bench, trying to look bored, ordinary, invisible. People came and went. A janitor pushed a bin past. A woman in scrubs lit a cigarette. No one paid attention. The narrator's phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message. "He's not following me anymore." They lost interest too fast. "Be careful." It was from Marcus. The narrator's pulse spiked. If the tail had backed off too quickly, it meant something worse. A different team. A second route. Backup. This wasn't over. A white Corolla pulled into the lot and stopped. A young woman leaned out the window. "You call for a ride?" "Yeah," the narrator said, sliding into the back seat. They gave her the new destination in Glendale, a small corner near a shuttered gas station. "You from around here?" she asked casually. "No," the narrator replied. "Just passing through." As they pulled away from the lot, the narrator glanced behind. No cars followed. No shadows moved. But the weight of the envelope had never felt heavier. They hadn't just escaped. They become the last line between truth and silence. As they pulled away from the park and ride, the narrator kept one hand on the envelope, the other on the door handle, heart thumping like it might give them away. The driver, late 20s, dark ponytail, earbuds in, seemed unconcerned, humming quietly along with a pop song as they cruised onto the boulevard. Every intersection they passed, every turn they made, the narrator scanned the mirrors, watched reflections, felt the hairs on their arms rise. Was that silver sedan behind them too long? Was the biker to their left lingering? But after 10 minutes, the streets began to empty, the traffic thinning out as they reached the older residential district of Glendale. Single-story houses sat behind chain-link fences and overgrown lawns. The safe house Marcus mentioned was just 4 blocks ahead, an abandoned duplex surrounded by tall pines and empty lots. It looked like a forgotten place, which was probably why Marcus chose it. "This good?" the driver asked, slowing down. "Yeah," the narrator said, handing over cash through the crack between the seats. "Thanks." They stepped out quickly, shoes crunching on loose gravel. The car pulled away, taillights vanishing behind a row of hedges. Alone now, the narrator crossed the street and slipped between the fence and a rusted electrical box, emerging into a narrow alley that led toward the safe house's back entrance. The afternoon sun had shifted lower, throwing long shadows between the garages and trash bins. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a lawnmower buzzed faintly. But otherwise, it was quiet, too quiet. The back door of the duplex stood slightly ajar. That wasn't right. Marcus said it would be locked with a coded latch, and he'd meet them there. The narrator froze, scanning the windows. No movement, no lights, but something fell off. Slowly, they approached the door and gently pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and plywood. The living room was stripped bare, nothing but an overturned plastic chair in the corner and some footprints in the layer of grime coating the floor. "Marcus?" they called, voice low. Nothing, just the hum of a refrigerator in the next room. They moved cautiously inside, closing the door behind them. A creak came from upstairs, then another. The narrator held their breath and stepped backward toward the kitchen. They needed an exit. Fast. A shadow moved on the stairwell. A man descended slowly, dressed in black, earpiece glinting in the light. He wasn't Marcus. Behind him, 2 more figures appeared. "Stop," the first one said, hand on his belt. "We just want to talk." The narrator didn't wait to hear more. They ducked through the kitchen, flung open the back door, and ran. The alley was empty again. They turned left, sprinting past trash cans, vaulting over a low gate into a neighbor's yard. Dogs barked wildly behind fences as they darted across a narrow driveway and into another alley. Behind them, the men shouted. One fired a shot. It hit a brick wall 2 feet to the left. The narrator didn't slow. They clutched the envelope to their chest and ran like hell, shoes slamming pavement, lungs tearing. They burst into a street lined with shuttered storefronts and low-budget motels. A battered phone booth stood crooked near a newspaper stand. An idea sparked. The prepaid phone in their coat pocket bust. A message from Marcus. "Change of plan. I was followed. Get out. Don't trust the house." Too late for that, but maybe not too late to stay ahead. The narrator darted into the phone booth, slammed the door, and pulled the flash drive from the envelope. They opened the base of the booth, just wires and dust, and shoved the drive inside, taping it beneath the shelf. They wrote a quick message on the envelope. "If I don't make it, it's in the booth. Under shelf." Then they stepped out, envelope back in hand. A black SUV turned the corner, heading their way. The narrator ran again. This time, not to escape, but to lead them away from what really mattered. The streets blurred past as the narrator sprinted through the dimming light, heart hammering like a war drum in their chest. The black SUV's tires thundered on the asphalt behind them, closing distance with ruthless precision. They darted left down an alley between a laundromat and a shuttered diner, dodging piles of trash and broken crates. The envelope clutched tight beneath their coat like a lifeline. Every step echoed urgency. Every breath was a sharp edge. They needed a plan fast. Ahead, the alley ended in a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. No way through there. But just before the fence, a narrow gap between 2 buildings caught their eye, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The narrator dove into the crawl space, scraping arms and knees on rough brick and jagged metal. They scrambled through the darkness, heart pounding in their ears, until they emerged behind a faded mural on the side of a community center. The roar of the SUV faded momentarily. They paused, chest heaving, trying to listen through the distant hum of city traffic and the occasional barking dog. No footsteps behind. The chase wasn't over, but they'd lost the immediate pursuit. Still, there was no time to celebrate. The files they carried were dangerous, and whoever wanted them would not give up easily. The narrator's phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Safe house compromised. Trust no one. Use burner number to contact a reporter I know at the Times. She's clean and won't back down. The narrator typed the burner number into their phone and sent a short message. I have proof. Need help. Downtown. Seconds later, a reply. Meet me at 7th and Main. Alone. Alone. The words sank like a stone, but it was the best shot they had. The narrator glanced down at the envelope, then stuffed it into the inner pocket of their jacket. They had to keep moving. Every step toward downtown was a step deeper into danger. The streets shifted from quiet residential to busier intersections, lined with bars and shops closing for the night. Neon signs flickered to life, casting a jittery glow on cracked sidewalks. People passed by, oblivious to the storm swirling just beneath the surface of their city. At 7th and Main, a woman waited outside a coffee shop, a tall figure in a leather jacket with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She glanced at the narrator as they approached. You must be the courier, she said softly, pulling out a small recorder and a notebook. I'm Rachel, reporter at the Los Angeles Times. You're in deeper trouble than you realize. The narrator handed over the envelope. Rachel opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the pages with growing intensity. This is huge, she said, voice barely above a whisper. If this leaks, it'll shake the entire federal clearance system. People will lose jobs, powerful men will fall. And the men chasing me? The narrator asked. Rachel's expression darkened. They're contractors. Mercenaries hired to suppress leaks like this. You're lucky you're still breathing. Together, they slipped into a nearby diner. Rachel ordered coffee and pulled out her laptop. I've got contacts who can protect us and verify the documents. But we need to move fast. Outside, the city began to hum with nightlife. The narrator sipped the bitter coffee, feeling the weight of everything in their hands. After weeks on the run, it felt surreal to finally be close to justice. But one thought haunted them. Was Ryan really gone? Or was this just the beginning of a larger game? Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and then leaned in close. There's been a sighting near the airport. Another agent spotted. Could be the same team hunting you. The narrator's stomach tightened. So they're still out there. Yeah, Rachel said grimly. But now we fight back. Outside the diner window, the city lights flickered like distant stars. The narrator took a deep breath. This time, they wouldn't run. They make sure the truth came out, no matter what it took. The city never truly slept. Even as dawn crept in, casting pale light over cracked sidewalks and rusted fire escapes, a quiet tension hummed beneath the morning air. Inside the small, nondescript office Rachel had secured, the narrator and the reporter sat side by side, reviewing the mountain of evidence. Screens glowed with documents, photographs, and emails, proof that linked corrupt officials, shadowy contractors, and the man named Ryan, whose sacrifice had lit this entire fire. You did the right thing coming here, Rachel said softly, eyes weary but determined. Now it's time to get this story to the world. The narrator nodded. Months of fear, running, hiding, it all funneled down to this moment. The weight of the envelope, now digital files stored safely on encrypted drives, felt lighter somehow, replaced by a growing resolve. Outside, the first real sunbeams sliced through smog, gilding the city's worn skyline. News trucks were already gathering near the courthouse steps, ready for the official press conference scheduled for noon. Rachel's phone buzzed. It's Marcus. He says the agencies are already scrambling. The leaks have gone public, and the fallout is starting. The narrator smiled faintly. Justice was slow, messy, and never perfect, but it was beginning. Do you think Ryan knew this would happen? The narrator asked. Rachel considered it. Maybe. Or maybe he just hoped it would. Sometimes it takes one person to light the fuse. Hours later, the courthouse steps were flooded with cameras and reporters. The narrator stood off to the side, watching as Rachel took the podium. Her voice was steady as she revealed the story of corruption, cover-ups, and a whistleblower's courage. The crowd listened, riveted, as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Officials resigned. Investigations launched. The city buzzed with a new sense of hope and anger mingled together. After the press conference, Rachel approached the narrator. "You did something brave. Not many would have held on this long." The narrator shook their head. "It wasn't just me. Ryan started this. Marissa helped. And Marcus risked everything. I was just the last piece." Rachel smiled warmly. "Every piece counts." Weeks passed. The narrator settled into a quieter life, far from the chaos of the airport chases and shadowy agents. They found peace in small things: a walk in the park, a good book, the slow hum of normal days. Marissa reached out occasionally, their bond forged in fire unbreakable. Marcus, too, checked in, always the steady protector from the shadows. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo. Ryan, smiling, safe. A note, not gone, just out of sight. "Keep fighting." The narrator's heart surged. The story was far from over, but now they knew. Hope wasn't just a flicker in the dark. It was a flame that refused to die. And as the sun set over the city skyline, the narrator looked ahead with quiet determination. The truth was out, and they would never stop standing for it. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. This story shows us that even in the darkest moments, courage and truth can light the way to justice and hope. If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more thrilling tales like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share what you think. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive. Together, we keep the truth shining bright.